Welcome to the Homeowners Journey. This is going to be a guide to help you get into a home. And we're very happy to be doing this for you. My name is John Richter. I'm with Edge Home Finance.
And I'm Heidi Herda with eXp Realty.
And our biggest thing that we want to really get accomplished here is really to help you on your journey to homeownership. There's lots of steps that you can go through and really to make it happen. And we want to try to make it as easy as possible, but also educate you at the same time. I think one of the biggest things that we really struggle with is really trying to figure out how do we start. So Heidi, when a person's just starting out looking to get into a house or be a homeowner, what's the number one thing they should probably do first?
Absolutely, 100%. They need to speak with a lender.
I would agree. I mean, I think without knowing that, you're really you're jeopardizing yourself and your agent because you're going to waste a lot of time by not really knowing what you can get approved for and what you should be looking at. So Tell us a little bit now, how's our market looking right now in the housing market?
So the last couple of years, most people have taken a look at what's happening or listened to the news. And unfortunately, not everything you hear is correct. So right now where we're sitting, most places are still awesome to sell. I mean, we definitely have multiple houses going in multiple offers. The sellers are getting a decent profit. However, on the buy side, the market isn't so strenuous. It's not, you don't have to give away $20,000 in your firstborn child anymore. You can actually get pre-approved and get a good real estate agent that will help you structure your offer to get approved. But again, that biggest thing is like talking to a lender right away first and, just going through and making sure. So my biggest thing is making sure that they do talk to that lender, and then, I'll kind of pass it over to you because
and it's a great point. I mean, I think that's one of the things that people really need to figure out, because one of the biggest misconceptions with homeownership is that you have to have 20% down. And I think that's one of the things that really holds people back, is because they think, well, I just don't have the money saved for that. And while putting 20% down, if that's possible, is great,
Yep.
You don't have to do that. There's programs out there that you can put as little as 3% down, 3.5%. There's a 1% program, and then getting more into the rural areas, you can even use USDA.
Yeah.
And there's other great programs out there, especially, if we have people that served our country. The VA loan is probably the best loan out there that you could possibly get, because, like we like to say, it's the only loan that you deserve, because you have actually put your time in and everything, and you can buy that home with zero down on a VA loan.
Down, yeah.
So, I mean, there's so many different things out there, but you have to start somewhere and get educated in the right way. So if we get through that hurdle and we get pre-approved, what's our next step, Heidi?
So from my standpoint, I wait to see that number from the lender, right? So what we're doing is we're going to create a range, and then we'll take that number, we'll work backwards with the buyer to make sure, hey, when we're looking at taxes, HOA, we're looking at all those things put together, and maybe even just take a quick average of utilities, make sure that payment's actually affordable to them. And then working backwards creates actually where is the comfort spot where you should be looking for a house.
And I think that's such a big thing, is to really be looking backwards. And people kind of laugh at me when I tell people, I always ask everybody, I'm like, well, what are you comfortable with for a house payment? But if you don't know, looking at it from being educated on what you're going to be paying for electrical, all these other things, that's not being calculated into your mortgage payment. When we're looking at that, we're not thinking of cable TV. We're not thinking of electrical or anything else that's going to be related to the house. So working backwards is a really key thing, especially when you're starting out. I would tell people one of the most important things that if you could do it is start budgeting. There's lots of great programs out there, whether via on social media or on classes that are offered through some counties, that you can get on a budgeting plan so that you know exactly what's going to happen when you get into that house, so that you can start building up for that, and so that it doesn't come as just something that's going to bite you later on down the road.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think when you have that in place, you're then going on to that next part of it. So once they've sat down, they've talked to me about getting into a house and what they can afford, and you working with them, working those numbers backwards, what's going to be that next step for them?
we're going to start getting searches set up. So ideally, we're going to do kind of a buyer checklist. So we're going to go through and get your top things. So what are the 3 must-haves in your house? Is it going to be location? Are you looking at good schools? Do you want to get ratings? There's so many factors in purchasing a house. And if you're, I always tell my buyers, I'm like, just think about how long you're going to live in this house. Is it going to be 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, 10 years? Are you never moving? But I like people to start thinking about, like, what does your life look like in 2 years or 3 years or 5 years? Are you still here? Are you going to have 100 kids? Are you going to have 2 kids? But those are factors that I see a lot in first-time home buyers, that when I go through and show them a house, I look at the layout. I want to know what they're doing in the next coming years to make sure their house is going to fit them.
Exactly. I mean, the worst thing you can do is go out and get something, fall in love with it, and then afterwards figure out this really doesn't work for our family. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a very important point in that. And I think the one good thing with the market, even though we don't have a lot of homes on the market right now, our inventory is very low, it does help first-time home buyers because they don't feel so rushed. Whereas a year ago to 18 months ago, where houses were flying off the market and we're having 20, 30, 40 different showings at a time on these places, it really could put people in a pinch because they felt like they had to buy it right away. Whereas doing it this way, you're actually setting yourself up, I think, for more success in being a homeowner because you're not so rushed in it.
Agreed.
And, wouldn't you agree with how the housing market is, even though we have low inventory? It's a good chance for people to maybe look at more than one property.
Exactly. It's moving fast, but it's not moving like it was in the last couple of years. People still have a moment to take a breath, assess what's happening, still get an inspection, do those things and do the due diligence, and that's important. And we're a little quieter on the market right now, even though there's low inventory. People still have a chance to take a breath and maybe walk through it a second time. But, the good ones, of course, always go, so don't wait.
They do, yeah. I mean, you don't want to wait too long. And, one of the things that I always hear on my side of it, on the lending side of it, is people complain. They say, well, the interest rates seem to be really high right now. And if you look historically over the last 30 years, rates are not that high right now. Now, what we went through these past 2 to 3 years with these really low interest rates, that was an anomaly. That doesn't happen. That's the only time in the history of the market that we saw rates like that. So for people to sit there and say they're going to wait for that, you're losing out. You're having an opportunity cost, meaning that if you were to buy today compared to 5 years, if you don't buy in that time frame, you're going to lose out on that money. And it doesn't matter what the interest rate is, because whatever house you do like, you fall in love with the house, not the interest rate. Yep. Interest rates can change all the time. But it's taking the opportunity to get into that house right now is what I think is so important.
Exactly. And I tell people, too, you can always refinance at some time, but, do your due diligence. Make sure that that's, the cost in refinancing makes sense for long term. If you're going to stay in the house for another year or two, maybe that doesn't make sense to you. But, if you look at historic rates and what happens in housing and everything, we don't want that. That means economically we're in another bad position, and that's not where we want to be.
Exactly. And I think it's so important because, with your history and being in real estate, you've seen what's happened to buyers that maybe have rushed into it and got into something they didn't want to, or get into terms that they didn't want to. And that doesn't help us out at all either.
No, that's not ever what we want.
And we don't want to go backwards like we were when we had housing, where we had the bubble. And it happened, and people were losing their houses and everything. And that's why I think, it's so important why we're doing this podcast now, is to educate people, because you know what? This is a journey. We want to guide you on that journey to homeownership, so that it's important not only to us, but it's important to you, because you're taking that investment in yourself so that you can be a homeowner, you can grow your family, you can build equity, and you know what? You're building in yourself when you're doing that.
Exactly. Wealth and homeownership is so important because, depending on where your next steps are. Maybe you get a property, a townhouse, something simple. It can be used as a rental property. So if you're looking at those long-term good fits for yourself and knowing, hey, I'm going to move out of state in the next couple of years, make sure you talk to your agent about that and say, hey, I might rent this out. I want to make sure that this townhome or whatever has the option to rent it out, and then we look for that. And then going forward, maybe if it's not an investment property or a rental, at least you've been building equity over time, that when your family grows or you need a bigger house or something, you can just trade up, and you've been all that time gaining equity. There's so much wealth in home ownership. Not only that, but just general pride of home ownership, to have something that you own. And make it yours, and memories and everything.
So I read this book a while back. It was called The Millionaire Next Door, and it talked about it. It interviewed couples that were starting out and had owned, and this older couple, I'll never forget it, because they made the comment of, the first house you buy doesn't have to be your dream house, but in order to get to your dream house, you have to start somewhere.
Exactly.
And they actually kept their house that they first bought and had rented it out, even sold it to their children. And then their children did the same thing, because all that time they kept building equity over and over and over. So I think it's a very important part to know that you got to start somewhere, and homeownership is a great way to start. So now let's talk about the 5 biggest mistakes homeowners do make when they actually decide to buy that property. And I think these are very, very important, because we don't want people to keep doing the same thing over and over. That's the definition of insanity.
Yeah.
So, being able to teach people and being on this podcast and being able to tell people, these are things that we've seen in our careers.
Yeah.
So what are we starting out with today?
We are starting out with not having a budget.
Again, we just talked about this. When you're going into the largest financial debt you're ever going to take out in your life, why not make sure that you're setting your budget the right way?
Exactly.
So that you know exactly what you're going to be able to afford. Because the last thing we want, I know on my side of it, is I don't want a person going out and buying a house and then having to sit there living off of macaroni and cheese and ramen noodles and everything like they had to when they were first young. You have to have a life outside of your house. And we don't ever want to put you in a spot where it's just not affordable, because in the end, it's not going to be good for anybody.
No, it's not. And unfortunately right now that we've had a couple rough years. So right now, actually, I have a client who I got her in one of her first houses, and it's in foreclosure.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because, she works really hard, she made payments, and unfortunately, things happen, and, you can get behind, things like that. So having reserves, making sure that, your bank account, if you're buying a house and there's nothing in your bank account, you're not prepared for, anything that could come up. And that, whether that be, a sickness, a leave of absence, home repair, or something like that. And unfortunately, she's in this circumstance, but, it's going to end up being okay for her. And she's going to be walking away with a $70,000 check, because she at least called me and said, hey, what do I do?
Yeah, which again, you're taking that into perspective of, at least you're getting something out of it. Again, we have a hot market in people selling part of it.
Yeah.
So if you are in that position, again, you reach out to someone professional like Heidi that can help you out, and don't walk away with anything. At least you're getting something out of it.
Talk to somebody. Don't freeze. Just reach out. But
Yeah.
again, the more important thing is that we just want to make sure that people understand, you really have to create a budget while you're getting in there. And if you don't, that's possibly what could happen. Or if you have unrealistic expectations, like we just talked about, maybe your first house isn't your dream home, but,
Yeah.
you can get into it, or you can make it your dream home after a while, but be conscientious of what you're doing financially when you're getting into a home, because you can easily spend way more than you can afford.
For sure. So let's go to number 2 on that, and that is doing and going out and trying to buy a house, or even getting excited about it without looking at your credit. Credit is the number one thing. And for a lot of people, there's lots of tools out there, whether it be Credit Karma or Experian or all these places that can offer you a free credit report. Not all of them. Those are credit simulators. They're not actually going to give you exactly what you need on that. And I think from hearing from people in the business, the number one thing is when they have to put a person in the car and they say, oh, no, I've already looked at my credit, everything's good. It usually turns out that it's not. And, anybody can tell you, oh, I have great credit. But until you actually are looking at your credit report, you really don't know. And again, that's why you have to trust a professional to look at that. After reviewing so many credit reports in my lifetime, I can tell you and help you understand that, because for most people, it's something that they're maybe looking at once a year, maybe even once every 5 years, which hopefully that's not the case. But
true.
Credit is so important that you don't want to waste your time, the agent's time, or anybody else's time if there's things that need to be cleared up on your credit before you even get into a car or before you even start looking at houses.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I guess my biggest thing is, again, same with you. I have people calling me all the time, and they're like, oh, my credit is wonderful. And then we pull it and they have a bunch of lates, or they forgot to tell me that maybe they had a foreclosure in the past. Those are some things that we can work through over time. But you kind of, once you get in, you have to be honest about where you really are with credit. If you've missed a couple payments or you've had a bankruptcy or something like that, it's important to actually reach out to somebody and say, hey, if I'm going to look, and maybe that's something you do a year before you truly want to buy, or at least 6 months to a year, and ask someone and just say, hey, this is what I want to do. I know I've had some things. How can I fix them? So a lot of times I know most people will say, I'm just going to quick pay everything off and close all my credit cards. Please don't do that.
No.
Please don't do that.
That's not a good option to do, because when they're looking at things, they need to know what you have available for credit. And sometimes it's not easy when you do have stuff on your credit, whether it be old stuff or maybe it's not even your stuff. To try to work as a consumer to get that stuff removed can take a lot of time and a lot of effort. And that's why it's important to, again, work with professionals. I work with a company that can help people with that. There is a fee for it, but they're doing it in the right way and getting things removed, so that if there was an issue in the past, they can help you with that. They can get that taken care of. Because to understand the language and what needs to be said to these people and what needs to be done is so difficult. I had a client that one time said, I can do this all on my own. And I think 6 months later, he paid the bill, still had not gotten the paperwork saying that it had been paid off, because the person that he paid to, which was a collection agency, never actually filed the paperwork back with the original creditor. So there's lots of things in that you just have to make sure, so that you don't have something just keep spiraling on you. Because when you get into homeownership, or if you're buying your first house with your significant other and you really haven't talked about credit, it can be a very awkward moment when I go through everything and have to tell them their credit score, and then they see your credit score, and it can really drive a nail in between you. And it's not a fun conversation, and I have had to be there before for that.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah. So what's number 3? We're going to number 3 of the 5 biggest mistakes.
Waiving an inspection.
Oy. So Heidi, why would a person ever want to waive an inspection?
So unfortunately, the last couple of years, that was kind of our big ticket item. That was the first thing when we're in a competition with other people. We get to the inspection part, and a lot of buyers were waiving it. And unfortunately, most of them, that was the only way they were going to get a house. And, we don't ever want to encourage that. Unfortunately, sometimes the buyers made that decision solely on their own. I would never suggest that would be the first thing on your mind, is to waive an inspection. But, I guess probably one of my biggest horror stories is I did tell a couple, hey, we have these inspections. And actually, it was a year and a half ago, so it was in the thick of it. And we had an opportunity to do some inspections, and I recommended that they do a sewer inspection, a radon inspection, and a regular one. Most people will always bypass the sewer inspection, and most realtors will not suggest it to their clients either, because they're just not educated enough. They just don't know. And these particular clients were worried about saving money on the inspection, and so they skipped it. And they called me about 3 weeks after closing, and their sewer was backing up all over inside of their house.
So you talked about a couple of different inspections, and I think one thing that people get hung up on is the difference between an appraisal, a home appraisal, and a home inspection.
Yeah, for sure.
What are the differences of those two?
The easiest way I explain it is in time. So when you're looking at a buyer's inspection, you're going through and there's probably about, I would say, a good 3.5 to 4 hours, depending on the size of the house. And this is paid for by the buyer. The inspector comes out, typically goes out beforehand, and starts with the exterior, goes around, does everything. And then the last about half hour, 45 minutes, I would say most buyers will come and just kind of do a rundown, a highlight reel of the items that the inspector found. And then with that, the appraisal, if you think about it again with time, an appraiser on a conventional loan, I always tell people, they'll probably be there for, anywhere between 30 minutes and 45 minutes. Now, if you're looking at a VA appraisal or FHA, they're going to be there maybe for a couple hours.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually kind of like a second inspection.
And I think the one key thing to remember that a home inspector is looking at the bare bones of the house. They're not putting a value on that house. They're looking at what is going on in the actual structure and around what's going to affect the structure.
Right.
The home appraiser is pulling up comparables of other houses, and that appraisal is being used for their end investor, because the end investor wants to make sure that they're going to be borrowing you this money. They want to make sure that that asset is in good condition and someone's not going to get hurt. Someone's not going to have,
Exactly.
anything that can affect their money. So I always tell people, one, that home appraisal is going to tell you the value. The home inspector is the one that's going to tell you about the bare bones of your house.
Exactly.
So, and I think I would agree with Heidi that it's something that should not be waived, because there's so many things, especially here in Minnesota, where you have these very cold winters and different things can happen, whether it be insulation, pipe leaks, pipe bursts, anything. You just don't know.
Right.
And unless you know that person that you're buying the house from, which most of the time people don't.
And even then, even if you do own, or even if you do know them,
Yeah.
there are so many things that happen with houses, and people overlook them or don't pay attention. I mean, even if the person lived in it for years, they're not even going to come close to everything that's on an inspection report. So you
Yeah.
can't just rely off someone's, I guess,
Opinion.
just, yeah.
Well, and it comes back to, again, working with a professional,
Right.
a professional real estate agent, that, it's a trust factor when you're doing this. And, if a person is just trying to sell their house, they may not tell you everything, whereas a home inspector is going to tell you everything about the house, because they've been in this house for 2, 3, 4, 5 hours, and
Right.
that's what they do best. They have to be certified, and they want to make sure everybody is doing the right thing.
I guess that's a side note there. Don't
Yeah.
let Uncle Jim come and inspect your house.
Yeah, no.
We have qualified inspectors that we can guide you and show you their qualifications. So Uncle Jim is probably very sweet and going to do it for $1 or $2, but that's not a good gamble you want to take.
Uncle Jim might not come back to do the repairs that are needed once Uncle Jim missed something, too.
Miss something, exactly.
So what's our next one that we're coming up on?
The next one is underestimating closing costs.
Oh, what do we do? People have to pay closing costs?
Oh, dear.
And I think that is one of the big misnomers, is when people are going into it, they just don't realize the market has become a little bit better with possibly asking for seller paid closing costs, but it's still not quite there where you're going to get everything that you need. But again, that is another one of those things that you have to plan for, whether it be coming from your assets that you have. Maybe you're taking a load on your 401k, or maybe your parents or grandparents or family members are going to gift you money for your
Exactly.
closing. But closing costs are an expense that are going to be out there, because everyone involved in it has to be paid, whether it be the title company, the real estate agents, myself, and the county and state that you live in. You're going to be paying these, that no matter what.
Everybody wants a piece of the pie.
Yeah, you have to pay those. Along with those, the other thing that people always get thrown off on is, if they have to, is escrow. And what escrow is, that's escrowing for your future taxes and insurance. That's money that's being put away right at your closing, so that when you're making your monthly payment, that money does go into that account, but it's going to be paying next year's taxes, next year's insurance. But it's a great way to help, again, back to that budgeting point, that you don't have to come up with those things as long as your escrow account is there. But you do have to have that money up front when you're going to your closing.
Yep. Exactly.
Some things I would tell people to be careful of, especially when closing costs they seem really high, is get a second opinion.
Exactly. Yeah.
A second opinion is not going to cost you any money, but it could save you thousands of dollars. I have one that we recently helped these clients. They actually closed this morning, and between the two estimates, it ended up saving them $18,000 in costs because they were paying discount points, and they didn't need to be paying discount points. So, and a second opinion is very key, especially when it's money that you're having to come up with closing costs.
Right. Exactly.
What are we at next?
Applying for new lines of credit before closing, our favorite.
Leah, let's talk about that, because this also happened recently where someone was so excited, and it was coming up on a holiday weekend, and there we go with the media again. And what's one of the biggest things they're always going to offer right around a big holiday that people need in their house?
Memorial Day
Furniture.
sales.
Yeah. If I buy this stuff, I'm going to get X amount off. What people need to understand is your credit is being monitored the whole entire time when you're in an application process for a mortgage. And if you do that and you pull that before you close on the house, it's called an unidentified debt. What we have to do then is we have to explain that debt. It can do many things. It can make you get more paperwork. It can make you not qualify for the house because it could be affecting your debt to income ratio.
Exactly.
So you have to be very, very, very clear. Do not obtain any new credit while you're going through the process until after you close on the house.
Exactly. Yeah. I know everybody gets excited too. They're like, oh my gosh, I can save 10% if I do it right now. Please do not do that.
Yeah.
Every time you take out credit, and not only that, but that's a credit pull. Yeah. So even just the ramifications of maybe not making you qualify for the loan, it's dropping your credit every single time you do it.
And when you're working with a mortgage side of it, not only is it doing that, but it can start affecting, like Heidi said, if your credit score goes down to a certain point, it's going to affect your rate. It's going to affect everything and every part of that to the point where you may not qualify for the loan anymore. Yep. So buying that furniture and saving 10% might be a great thing, but it also might cost you your house.
Exactly. Yep. Everybody's excited, but you have to be patient and do things in the right order.
Yeah. All right, what are we coming up on next?
Buying more house than you can afford.
Number one thing, don't overspend on a house, because like we talked about in the beginning, the last thing we want people to do is overspend, because it's going to affect everything that you have. It's one of those, you can have an affordable house, live in that house for a couple of years, and then use the equity from that to get into that next house that you want. But to overspend, it's very difficult because you're really pinching everything that you're trying to do. And then it makes it very difficult not only on professionals when we're doing this, because the sense of urgency and desperation that it brings out in people when they're trying to buy more than what they actually qualify for can be very, very difficult to work with.
Have you ever told someone not to buy a house?
I have.
I have too.
It's not fun.
Not once, but twice.
I had people that I told them, I said, you know what, I just don't think you're ready to buy a house yet, because they wanted something that I couldn't approve them for. Now, they did go somewhere else, and they did get that house, and less than a year later, they also got divorced and had to sell that house.
Yeah.
And it causes so many problems by overspending on a house. And what fun is that? It's just not. Homeownership should be fun. And if you're trying to overspend on a house, it's going to be tough.
It is. And nobody wants to be house broke. I mean, what are you going to do? Just sit in your house all day?
Yeah, it gets kind of bored.
It's kind of boring.
So it's just, these are just 5 quick things that we want to talk about to really let you know that, there are things that can be out there that can affect you. But if you're educated in the right way, and you do your plan and you do your budgeting, you can become successful in home ownership. And that's why we're here to, again, we want to guide you on your journey to home ownership.
Right.
All right, this is episode number 1. I really hope you guys can stay with us. We have a lot more great things coming up in our podcasts in the future to really help you educate, learn, save, budget, and become a homeowner. So I really appreciate you. Hopefully you guys subscribe, like, follow, do all the little things that you want to. If you have questions for Heidi or I, feel free to reach out. We're more than happy to help you.
Perfect. Awesome.
We'll see you
Thanks,
next
John.
time.